The restaurant was buzzing with life. Laughter mixed with clinking silverware and the soft hum of conversation. The aroma of fresh-baked bread and sizzling steaks filled the air. The evening was just beginning, and Jared was in the middle of it all. His job as a waiter at the Grand Oak Hotel was simple enough: serve drinks, take orders, and ensure guests were happy. But tonight, everything changed. Jared's eyes scanned the dining room, his attention flickering between the tables. He had just dropped off a bottle of wine for a couple in the far corner when the sudden, horrifying sound of a baby coughing caught his ear. His heart skipped a beat as he turned instinctively toward the noise. A young mother, no older than 25, was sitting at a table near the window. Her face was ashen, her hands frantically patting her baby's back. The baby, no more than 6 months old, had tears streaming down its face, its tiny chest heaving. The mother was panicking. The baby's breathing was shallow, and the distress in her eyes was unmistakable. "Help! Somebody help!" she cried, her voice breaking as she fought to keep the baby upright. Jared's body moved before his mind could catch up. His feet carried him swiftly across the room, dodging a waiter carrying a tray of appetizers and a group of teenagers who were laughing a little too loudly. He reached the table in seconds, his pulse pounding in his ears. The baby's face was turning an alarming shade of blue. Jared didn't have time to think, only to act. His training had kicked in instantly. He had taken a basic first aid course when he started working here, but in that moment, it felt like a lifetime of preparation condensed into a few seconds. He pushed the mother aside gently but firmly, his voice steady as he spoke. "Ma'am, please step back. Let me help." The woman didn't hesitate, she stepped back, her eyes wide with fear. Jared could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He didn't know this baby, didn't know the mother, but this was a life in his hands. The room had gone eerily quiet, every pair of eyes trained on him. The baby gasped for air, choking on something lodged in its throat. He knew what to do. Jared bent the baby forward slightly, placing his palm firmly between the child's shoulder blades. His hands were shaking, but his focus was razor-sharp. With one solid motion, he struck the baby's back with the heel of his hand. Nothing. His stomach twisted. This wasn't working. His mind raced through the steps of the Heimlich maneuver. He glanced around for something, anything, to use to help. But there was nothing. "Come on, please," Jared whispered under his breath. He couldn't fail this child. He shifted his position, lifting the baby's chest and holding its tiny body firmly against him. With a quick motion, he began the Heimlich, pressing with all his might, using the force of his entire body. The baby's small frame barely moved. But Jared's heart hammered in his chest as he desperately applied more pressure. Time seemed to stop. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the baby's chest heaved again. The sound that came from the child was nothing short of miraculous. The small body gasped for air, struggling at first, then taking in breath after breath with growing strength. Jared stood frozen, the fear slowly fading from his face. The baby coughed again, harder this time, and then, miraculously, it began to cry. Loudly. The relief in the mother's face was palpable. She stumbled forward, her arms trembling as she took the child back into her arms. Tears streamed down her face, and she held the baby close, murmuring soft reassurances. "Oh my God, thank you. Thank you so much," she whispered, her voice cracked with emotion. The entire restaurant seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. There were a few murmurs of astonishment, some soft applause. Jared stood there, his body still shaking, his mind still trying to process the sheer intensity of what had just happened. He felt the sweat on his forehead, his palms clammy, but the relief was undeniable. He had done it. The baby was alive. He had saved a life. He stepped back, wiping his hands on his apron, trying to regain his composure. People around him were still whispering, some patting him on the back, others taking out their phones to capture the moment. But all Jared could focus on was the mother and her baby. But just as quickly as the moment of heroism had arrived, the tension in the room shifted. Behind him, he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, approaching with a purposeful calm that contrasted sharply with the chaos that had just unfolded. "Jared, we need to talk," came the voice from behind him. It was James, the manager. His tone was cool and measured, not the praise Jared had been expecting. His face was stern, as if he had been waiting for this exact moment to unfold. Jared turned around, still processing the events, his body still humming with adrenaline. "Not now, James," Jared said, his voice a little shaky. "I just saved that baby's life." "Right." James cut him off, his arms crossing over his chest. "And that's exactly what I need to talk to you about." Jared blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" "You've disrupted service," James interrupted again, his eyes cold. "Do you have any idea what kind of scene you've caused here?" Jared's heart sank. "What? Are you serious? I just saved a child's life." "What kind of person?" "I don't care if you saved the baby or not," James snapped, his voice growing colder with each word. "You caused a scene. You disrupted the entire dining room. Do you understand how many complaints I've gotten? People are here to enjoy their meals, not watch you play hero." Jared's stomach twisted. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. The words felt like they were coming from someone who had completely forgotten what it meant to be human. He opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. He had no idea how to respond to this. "Do you know how much money this hotel makes on a single night like tonight?" James continued, as if reading from a script. "You're not just some waiter here, Jared. You're a part of an operation. A show. And you just ruined that. People want an experience, not a spectacle." Jared felt his breath catch in his throat. It felt like the floor was slipping out from under him. He glanced around, searching for someone, anyone, who might intervene, but the guests were already turning back to their meals, the moment of drama fading into the background. It was as if he hadn't just saved a life at all. "I'm sorry," James said with finality. "But you're fired." Jared stood there, numb. It wasn't just the words themselves that hit him so hard. It was the finality, the coldness in James's eyes. There was no empathy, no recognition of the life-or-death moment he had just been a part of. It felt like a slap in the face. For a moment, Jared couldn't even move. His body seemed to lock in place. The sounds of the restaurant, the clinking of silverware, the hum of conversations, seemed to fade into the background. His focus was on James, the man who was now dismissing him as if he were nothing more than an inconvenience. "This can't be happening," Jared said, his voice barely a whisper. "I just saved a life, and you're firing me?" James shrugged. "You'll get your final paycheck. Good luck out there." Jared's hands clenched into fists at his sides. He was furious, heartbroken, and confused all at once. He had done the right thing, and yet, here he was, standing at the edge of losing everything. He turned away from James, his legs heavy beneath him. He didn't say anything else, there was nothing left to say. As he walked out of the hotel, the weight of the decision, of the consequences, pressed down on him like a 100-pound stone. He couldn't stop thinking about the mother and her baby, about the thank yous and the applause. But now, all that was left was the emptiness of a job lost, of a sacrifice that had seemingly meant nothing. The door closed behind him, and the real world seemed to crash down in that moment. Was it really worth it? Had saving a life cost him everything? The cool night air hit Jared as he stepped out of the hotel, the weight of his actions, and the consequences, settling on his shoulders like a heavy coat. He could still hear the baby's cries echoing in his mind, the overwhelming relief that had flooded through him when the child had finally gasped for air. That sound had felt like a victory. It had been a moment of life, of triumph, and now it felt like a distant memory. But what followed had shattered that sense of accomplishment. Being fired. Dismissed. Without any recognition for his actions, just cold, indifferent bureaucracy. The injustice of it made him sick to his stomach. Jared walked aimlessly, his feet moving of their own accord, carrying him down the street away from the hotel. His breath came in shallow bursts, his mind replaying the conversation over and over again. You disrupted service. This wasn't a scene you were supposed to make, Jared. It didn't make sense. None of it did. He had saved a child's life. That was the kind of thing people praised, right? That was the kind of thing people would remember. But not here. Not in this world. The streets around him felt foreign, even though he had walked them countless times. The city felt too big. Too cold. He wasn't sure where he was going, he just kept walking, hoping that with each step, he might outrun the anger, the disbelief, the crushing disappointment. A sharp buzz from his pocket interrupted his thoughts. He pulled out his phone, half expecting it to be his friend Tyler, but when he saw the name on the screen, his stomach dropped. It was his mother. Hey, Mom, he answered, trying to sound normal, even though he felt anything but. Jared, honey, is everything okay? Her voice was light, laced with concern. I heard what happened at work tonight. Are you all right? He froze. How did she know? How did you hear about that? Jared asked, his voice a little rougher than he intended. He didn't want to get into it. Not yet. Not like this. The news, sweetie. It's been all over the local stations. The hotels even made a statement. They're calling it a heroic rescue, but there's something off about it. I'm worried about you. Jared's chest tightened. He could hear the worry in her voice, the way she was trying to make sense of what had happened. I don't want to talk about it, Mom, he said, his tone harsher than he meant. I'm fine. Jared, you can't be fine. You've just lost your job. You're upset. And I know you're angry about what happened. But I saved a baby's life, Mom. And they fired me for it, he cut her off, the bitterness slipping through his clenched teeth. Do you understand that? I saved a life, and they fired me like I was some kind of criminal. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. It lasted longer than he expected, the weight of the words settling between them like a thick fog. Finally, his mother spoke, her voice softer now. I don't understand, she admitted. But I'm sure there's more to this. You need to figure out what's really going on here. Don't let it go. If you were fired for doing the right thing, you deserve to know why. Jared's eyes narrowed. That wasn't what he had wanted to hear. He wanted comfort, understanding. But she was right. She was always right. I don't know where to even start, Mom, he confessed, his voice cracking for the first time that night. I don't know who to talk to or what to do. Start with the people who were there, honey, she said, her voice steady. Start with the witnesses. You don't have to go this alone. The conversation ended soon after, but the words stuck with him. Start with the people who were there. He thought about the onlookers, the diners who had applauded him. Some had even been filming, recording everything. Maybe there was something there, some clue that would help him understand why the hotel was acting the way it was. Jared spent the next few days in a haze. The world felt out of focus, like he was moving through a dream that he couldn't wake up from. He hadn't gone back to the hotel, but he had scoured every news outlet that had covered the incident. It was all the same, the heroic waiter who had saved the baby's life. There were interviews with guests who had witnessed it. There were articles lauding his quick thinking. Some people were even calling him a local hero. And yet, the hotel had made no mention of Jared's name, no acknowledgement of who had saved the child. Instead, they had made it clear that the incident had been handled, and that everything was back to normal. But what did that mean? What were they trying to hide? Jared scrolled through the comments on the news sites, searching for any clues. He wasn't sure what he was hoping to find. He just knew that he couldn't let it go. "Jared, I think I've found something," Tyler's voice broke through his thoughts. He had called just as Jared was scrolling through a particularly frustrating thread on a local news site. "What?" Jared replied, his voice distracted. He wasn't in the mood for small talk. "Look at this," Tyler said, his tone urgent. "There's a post from someone who claims to have been at the restaurant the night of the incident. They said there was more to the story. That someone inside the hotel didn't want you to be a hero." Jared sat up straighter. "What do you mean?" "I'm sending it to you now. Check it out." Tyler's voice was laced with concern. Jared opened the message. It was a screenshot of a comment on a news article. The post read, "I was there that night. It wasn't just a choking. The baby was set up. Someone inside the hotel wanted it to happen." Jared's breath caught in his throat. He read it again, his hands trembling. Someone inside the hotel wanted it to happen. What did that mean? Who would want something like this to happen? His mind raced, the suspicion creeping in. Who inside the hotel could be involved in something like this? His head began to spin, but the feeling of dread was soon replaced by the drive to uncover the truth. He needed answers. And he wasn't going to stop until he got them. Jared couldn't shake the feeling that everything was spiraling. That message Tyler had sent him, the one about the baby being set up, haunted him. How could anyone inside the hotel have been involved? Who would go so far as to orchestrate a choking incident just for the sake of, what? Was it a sick game, or was there something more sinister at play? He spent the next few days scouring the web, checking his social media notifications, and reaching out to people who might have been present at the restaurant that night. He had to find someone who could help him make sense of this, someone who might have witnessed something unusual or suspicious. But most of the people who had commented on the story were just focusing on the baby's miraculous rescue, congratulating the hotel and the heroic waiter for their quick actions. Not a single person seemed to question the circumstances surrounding the incident. It wasn't until Jared decided to visit the restaurant again, the place where it all started, that he felt like he was getting closer to the truth. The dim glow of the hotel lobby greeted him like an old acquaintance, but this time, it felt different. He had been in this space countless times before, serving guests, laughing with coworkers, and basking in the warmth of the busy, bustling restaurant. But now, it felt cold and unfamiliar, the air thick with the tension of his unexpected departure. Jared was aware of the looks from the staff as he walked through the lobby. Some tried to avoid eye contact, while others pretended not to notice him. But he didn't care. He had a job to do now, and it was more important than any awkward encounter. He headed straight to the bar area, hoping to find someone he knew, someone who could give him the information he needed. The bartender, Kevin, was wiping down the counter when Jared approached. He had always been friendly with Kevin, but tonight, the bartender's eyes darted nervously as Jared drew closer. "Hey, Kevin," Jared said casually, trying to keep his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. "Got a minute?" Kevin hesitated, glancing over his shoulder as though he were afraid someone might be listening. "I don't know if this is a good idea, man," he muttered. "You should really leave. They'll see you." Jared's jaw clenched. "I'm not leaving until I get some answers." Kevin looked around again, then leaned in, lowering his voice to a whisper. "Look, you're not the first one to ask about the incident. A lot of people are talking about it. But no one's really saying anything." He paused, wiping his hands on a towel as though trying to compose himself. There's something not right about all this. I don't know who's behind it, but you should be careful. There are people here who don't want the truth to come out. Jared's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? Who are these people? Kevin swallowed hard. I can't say much more, man. But if you're really serious about getting answers, you need to start with the managers. They know more than they're letting on. You might want to talk to Lisa. She's been here a long time. She knows the ins and outs. Jared nodded, feeling a flicker of hope. This was the break he needed. Where can I find her? Kevin hesitated, glancing over at the back office where the management team typically worked. She's probably in there. But don't let her see you. Trust me on that. Thanks, Kevin. I appreciate it, Jared said, his voice tight with determination. Kevin didn't reply but gave a subtle nod as Jared turned and headed toward the back office. He knew that confronting Lisa would be risky, but it was the only lead he had. The door to the office was cracked open, and Jared pushed it just enough to peer inside. Lisa sat at a desk, her fingers typing quickly on a computer. Her brow was furrowed, her lips set in a serious line. For a moment, Jared thought about turning back. Maybe he should let it go. Maybe there was no point in digging deeper. But then he remembered the baby's face. The look of terror before he had stepped in. The relief when the child started to breathe again. The hero's applause. And the cold dismissal he had faced the moment the crisis had passed. No, he couldn't let it go. Not now. Jared knocked lightly on the doorframe, and Lisa's head snapped up. Her eyes widened with recognition, and her expression faltered for just a moment, something he wouldn't have noticed if he weren't paying such close attention. What are you doing here? Lisa asked, her voice tight. She didn't stand up. Didn't offer him a seat. It was clear she wasn't happy to see him. I need to talk to you, Jared said, stepping inside the office without waiting for permission. About the baby. About what happened. Lisa's lips pressed into a thin line. I don't know what you're talking about. Cut the crap, Lisa, Jared shot back. You know exactly what I'm talking about. This wasn't just a choking incident. Someone set that baby up to be in danger, and you know it. For a long moment, Lisa didn't speak. She just stared at him, her eyes calculating, as if weighing whether or not she should say anything. Finally, she sighed and leaned back in her chair. You don't know what you're talking about, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. You think you're the only one who's noticed something off about this? There's been a lot of whispers around here. People aren't stupid, Jared. But there's nothing I can do. There's nothing anyone can do. Jared's heart was pounding in his chest. Who's behind this? Why did they set the baby up? Lisa shook her head. It's bigger than you think. The people in charge, they'll do anything to keep this under wraps. They'll do whatever it takes to protect their own interests. And if you keep pushing, you'll be the next target. Jared's blood ran cold. You're telling me to stay quiet? You want me to just forget that I saved a life? Forget that I lost my job over it? I'm telling you to be careful, she replied, her voice low. This isn't some small-town restaurant anymore. You don't know who you're dealing with. A shiver ran down Jared's spine, but the truth was clear. He couldn't back down. Not now. Not after everything he had been through. He had already lost his job. He wasn't about to lose his integrity. I'm not backing down, he said firmly. I'm going to find out who's responsible. And when I do, they'll regret it. Lisa looked at him one last time, then gave a barely perceptible nod. Good luck, Jared. You'll need it. As Jared left the office, the weight of her words hung heavily on his mind. He had no idea what he was getting himself into, but one thing was certain: the deeper he went, the more dangerous it would become. Jared couldn't shake the feeling that everything was tightening around him like a noose. The conversation with Lisa had stirred up more questions than answers. What was she trying to warn him about? What kind of people had the power to control everything from behind the scenes? And, more importantly, why had they set up the baby's choking incident? He spent the next few days trying to piece it all together. The unsettling feeling of being watched never left him. Every time he stepped outside, he looked over his shoulder, half expecting someone to be lurking in the shadows. Was someone following him? Was someone keeping track of his every move? He couldn't tell, but the tension in the air was undeniable. The sense of being trapped, of not knowing who he could trust, was starting to eat away at him. On the 5th day since his firing, Jared made the decision to visit the one person who might still be able to help him, Emily, the waitress who had been working the night of the incident. Emily had been at the bar when the baby started to choke, and she had witnessed everything. But unlike the other staff, who had been too afraid to talk, Emily had seemed different. She wasn't afraid to speak her mind, and Jared had a feeling she knew more than she had let on. He reached out to her through social media. "Hey, Emily. I need to talk. It's important." The reply came almost immediately. "Meet me outside the diner at 7 p.m. Don't let anyone see you." The words sent a chill through him, but he couldn't afford to hesitate. This was the chance he'd been waiting for. That evening, Jared arrived at the diner, its neon sign casting an eerie glow on the empty parking lot. The streets were quiet, the usual noise of the city muted by the soft hum of the diner's lights. He looked around before entering, his nerves on edge. No one was following him, as far as he could tell. Still, he kept his guard up as he pushed open the door. Inside, Emily was sitting at a booth in the back corner, her eyes scanning the room. She looked up when Jared approached, her expression unreadable. "Sit down," she said, gesturing toward the seat across from her. "We don't have much time." Jared slid into the booth, leaning forward. "What's going on, Emily? What do you know about the baby? And why does everyone at the hotel keep pretending nothing happened?" Emily glanced over her shoulder nervously, her fingers fidgeting with the edges of her menu. "I'm not supposed to talk about this, Jared. But I can't just sit by and do nothing." Her voice was barely a whisper, but the urgency in it was clear. Jared leaned in closer. "You know something, don't you? You saw something that night. What aren't you telling me?" She hesitated for a moment, then sighed deeply. "Okay. I'll tell you. But you have to promise me something. If this goes south, you'll get out of town. Don't stick around. Don't try to be the hero. They won't just fire you next time. They'll what?" Jared pressed. Emily's eyes flicked to the door again, then back at him. "I don't know exactly who they are, but I know what they do to people who get in their way. You've seen what happened to you already. They'll ruin you, Jared. Trust me." Jared's heart pounded, but he didn't flinch. "I'm not running. Not this time. Tell me what happened." She took a deep breath, her eyes locking onto his. "That night, when the baby started choking, it wasn't an accident. Someone tampered with the food. The baby was fine when they sat down, but someone made sure that kid would choke. They put something in the food. Something that wouldn't be noticed unless you were looking for it." Jared's blood went cold. "You're saying someone deliberately poisoned the food? But why? Who would do that?" Emily lowered her voice even further, leaning in as though the walls might have ears. "I don't know who, but I have a theory. The hotel was having a secret meeting that night, some kind of corporate dinner in the private rooms. There were a lot of high-profile people there. I overheard bits and pieces of the conversation when I was clearing the plates. They were talking about an incident to draw attention. Something that would get people talking. Jared felt his heart skip a beat. So, the choking wasn't just some random accident? It was staged? Emily nodded grimly. Exactly. They knew exactly how it would play out. The baby was the perfect victim, too young to speak, too innocent to defend themselves. And when you stepped in, they knew it would make the news. The hotel would come out looking like heroes. But they didn't count on you getting fired. That part wasn't supposed to happen. But why? Jared asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Why go so far to set me up? What could they gain from all this? I don't know. But I've seen the signs. The higher-ups are up to something bigger. They were looking for a way to cover something up, something they didn't want getting out. And the baby choking? That was just the distraction they needed. Jared's mind was racing. The pieces were falling into place, but he couldn't make sense of them. The more he thought about it, the more questions popped up. Who were these people? What were they hiding? And most importantly, who was behind it all? Before he could ask more, Emily grabbed his arm, her grip tight. You need to stop looking, Jared. You've already got their attention. If you keep digging, they won't stop until you're gone. They'll destroy you. But Jared's resolve was only hardening. I'm not stopping. I can't. Emily's face twisted with fear, but she nodded. Just, be careful. There's more going on here than you know. They're watching you. You're not just fighting the hotel. You're fighting something bigger. Something powerful. Jared left the diner in a daze, the weight of Emily's words pressing heavily on his chest. She was right about one thing, he couldn't stop now. But if what she said was true, if he was really up against a force more powerful than just a corrupt hotel, then the stakes had just gotten a whole lot higher. The hotel wasn't just covering up a mistake. It was hiding something. That night, as Jared lay in bed, the silence felt suffocating. He knew he was in deeper than he had ever intended. He had wanted to expose an injustice. He had wanted to clear his name. But now, the truth was so much darker than he had ever imagined. He was no longer fighting for a simple apology or a chance to return to his job. He was fighting for his life. The walls seemed to close in on him, and he knew that with each passing hour, the danger would only grow. But he couldn't turn back now. Not when he was so close to the truth. He had to dig deeper. And this time, he wasn't going to stop until he uncovered everything. Jared couldn't help but feel like he was walking a tightrope now, each step more uncertain than the last. The more he uncovered, the more dangerous it became. The choking incident was no longer just an isolated event, it was part of something bigger, something far darker. But Emily's warning had stuck with him. He knew he couldn't go any further without more information, without an ally. But who could he trust? Who would help him unravel this twisted conspiracy when everyone seemed to be working against him? The answer came unexpectedly. It was a late morning when Jared received a call. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice on the other end was unmistakable. Jared, it's Kevin. The bartender. The voice was low and urgent. We need to talk. Meet me at the old warehouse by the docks tonight. You don't have much time. His heart raced. Kevin had been cautious before, hesitant to get involved. Why the sudden change? Why the urgency? Jared had no idea, but he wasn't about to let the opportunity slip away. By the time evening fell, Jared was standing in front of a dilapidated warehouse, its rusted exterior a stark contrast to the sleek, modern hotel where he had worked just days ago. The docks were eerily quiet, the only sound coming from the distant lapping of water against the pier. As he stepped closer, his breath fogging in the cold air, he could see a faint light flickering through the cracks in the building's boarded-up windows. The shadows made everything feel more sinister than it probably was. Jared knocked on the door. Twice. 3 times. After a long pause, the door creaked open just a fraction. Kevin's face appeared, peering out cautiously. His eyes darted around, checking for anyone who might be watching, before he stepped aside to let Jared in. Once inside, Kevin locked the door behind them, securing the only exit. "Let's keep it quiet," Kevin said, his voice barely a whisper. "This place isn't safe. If anyone sees us talking, we're both done for." Jared nodded, the weight of the situation sinking in. "What's going on, Kevin? Why are we meeting here? What's the real story behind the hotel?" Kevin led him deeper into the warehouse, past stacks of old crates and crates of forgotten materials. They stopped by a table under a dim light, where Kevin gestured for Jared to sit. "I can't keep quiet anymore," Kevin said, looking around as if checking for eavesdroppers. "I didn't know what I was getting into when I started working there. I thought I was just another bartender at a fancy hotel, making good tips. But this whole thing, the choking, the way they fired you, it's all connected. And it's way worse than you think." Jared leaned in, his heart pounding. "How is it all connected? What are they hiding? And why target a baby?" Kevin hesitated, glancing at the door again before he spoke. "It's not just about the hotel. It's bigger. Way bigger. You saw that dinner, right? The corporate dinner in the private rooms? That wasn't just a regular event. It was a front for something far more dangerous. The people who were there, they weren't just business types. Some of them were tied to some very shady organizations, people with power, money, and connections. The choking incident? It wasn't random. It was meant to distract people." Jared felt a cold shiver run down his spine. "You mean it was staged?" Kevin nodded grimly. "Exactly. And it wasn't the only distraction. They've been staging these incidents for months, maybe even longer. They make sure they get the public's attention, then they cover up something bigger in the background." Jared's mind raced. He couldn't make sense of all this. A staged choking to cover up something else? What could be so important that they would risk everything for it? "You're talking about a conspiracy. But why involve a baby? Why not just cover their tracks quietly?" Kevin's face turned pale as he spoke. "It's not just about covering tracks. The baby wasn't an accident. That child was meant to be a symbol. A warning. The people who planned this, who pulled the strings, they want control. And they want to send a message to anyone who tries to expose them. The choking incident was just the first step. And now that it's out there, they know people like you and me will start poking around." Jared's breath caught in his throat. "You're saying they're using the baby as a pawn?" Kevin nodded. "Exactly. The baby's parents, they're nothing but pawns in a much bigger game. They were chosen because they were vulnerable. All the while, these people have been pulling the strings in the background, running operations you wouldn't believe, money laundering, corporate espionage, illegal arms deals. And now they're trying to shut down anyone who's close to finding out the truth." Jared's mind was reeling. He'd thought he was just dealing with a simple case of corporate corruption. But now it seemed like he was tangled up in something far more sinister. He didn't know who he could trust. He had no idea how far these people were willing to go to keep their secrets hidden. "And you've been involved in this whole thing, haven't you?" Jared asked, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside. Kevin winced, but then nodded. "I didn't know what I was getting into. At first, it was just small favors, delivering packages, handling special orders. Then it got worse. They started making me work security for those dinners, making sure no one could hear what was going on behind closed doors. I didn't realize what they were up to until it was too late. But I couldn't just walk away, not when I knew too much. I tried to get out. They warned me that if I talked, they'd make sure I disappeared. Jared absorbed this information with a growing sense of horror. He had known there was something off about the hotel and the people involved, but this was something else entirely. This was bigger than he could have ever imagined. So, what now? Jared asked, a lump forming in his throat. What can we do about it? Kevin looked at him seriously. There's only one way out now. We need to expose them before they can do more damage. We need to find the truth, find out what they're hiding in those private rooms, what they've been covering up. If we don't, they'll keep playing these games. They'll keep using people as pawns. And people like you and me will be silenced. Jared nodded, determination rising within him. We need to get to the bottom of this. Now more than ever. That night, as Jared made his way back home, his mind buzzed with new revelations. What Kevin had told him had changed everything. The stakes were no longer just about his job or a simple injustice. This was a matter of life and death. There were people in power who were willing to go to any lengths to protect their secrets, and Jared had just become their enemy. But he couldn't back down now. Too much was at stake. He was going to expose them. Jared couldn't sleep that night. His mind was a blur of thoughts, most of them dark and unsettling. Everything Kevin had revealed to him was a tangled web of deceit, corruption, and manipulation. The hotel he had once worked for was no longer just a job, it was a front, a mere piece of a much larger puzzle, and Jared was now a key part of that puzzle. As the first light of dawn broke through the blinds, Jared lay in bed staring at the ceiling. He thought about the danger he was in. It was no longer just about his job or the baby's choking incident. It was about survival. He wasn't just fighting to clear his name anymore, he was fighting for his life. But even in the midst of all this fear, one thing was clear, he couldn't back out now. Too many people were counting on him, too many innocent lives were at stake. It was late afternoon when Jared received another unexpected message. The text was brief and to the point, meet me at the underground garage. The parking lot on the north side. Don't bring anyone. No name. No explanation. Jared didn't even think twice. He grabbed his jacket, his heart pounding as he stepped out of the apartment, heading toward the garage. Every step he took felt like it might be his last. This was no longer about a job, a baby, or a corporate dinner, it was a game of life and death, and Jared had no choice but to keep playing. When he reached the parking garage, he was greeted by the sight of a black sedan parked in the shadows. The car's tinted windows gave no hint as to who might be inside. Jared approached cautiously, scanning the area for any signs of danger. He could hear the sound of distant traffic and the hum of the city, but here in the underground garage, everything felt unnervingly quiet. As he reached the car, the window rolled down, and Kevin's face appeared, a grim look on his features. Get in, Kevin said urgently, glancing around. Jared hesitated for a second before sliding into the passenger seat. As the door clicked shut, Kevin started the engine and pulled out, taking a sharp left and speeding off down the dimly lit road. What's going on? Jared asked, his voice laced with tension. Kevin didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed glued to the road, and Jared could feel the weight of the moment hanging in the air. They know we're onto them, Kevin finally said, his voice low. They've been watching us. They know you're getting close to figuring everything out. And now they're coming for you. Jared's stomach dropped. What do you mean they're coming for me? Who are these people? What are they capable of? Kevin glanced over at him. They're not just businessmen or corrupt officials. Some of these people are high up in the government, in the police, even in the media. They control everything behind the scenes. If you keep digging, you'll expose them, and they can't let that happen. They'll stop at nothing to protect their empire. The words hit Jared like a punch to the gut. The more Kevin spoke, the more he realized how little he truly understood. His entire world had shifted, and now he was caught in the middle of something far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The drive felt like it lasted an eternity, but eventually, Kevin pulled into a small, unmarked building on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much more than a warehouse, its windows dark and covered with grime. Jared couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap, but Kevin didn't seem worried. "You have to trust me," Kevin said, his voice firm. "This is the only place where we can get the information we need to take them down. We have one shot at this. If we screw it up, we won't get another chance." Jared nodded, even though doubt still gnawed at him. "How do you know we can trust these people?" Kevin gave him a hard look. "I don't. But we have no choice. If we don't do this now, we might not get another chance." Jared followed Kevin into the building. The air inside was thick and musty, the smell of mildew and rust clinging to the walls. They moved quickly through the dimly lit hallway, and Jared felt a chill crawl up his spine as they approached a door at the end. Kevin knocked 3 times before pushing the door open. Inside, a man sat at a desk, hunched over a set of old, crumpled files. He looked up as they entered, his face expressionless. He was older, probably in his mid-50s, with a grizzled look and an air of authority that instantly made Jared wary. "Kevin," the man said in a low voice, his gaze flicking to Jared. "Is this him?" Kevin nodded. "This is Jared. He's the one I told you about." The man stood up and extended his hand to Jared. "John," he said simply, not waiting for a response before continuing. "We've been following your progress. It's impressive that you've made it this far without getting caught. Most people who dig too deep end up dead." Jared shook the man's hand, but his unease only grew. "What exactly is going on? Why are we here?" John gestured to a stack of papers on the desk. "You've been investigating the hotel and its ties to a much bigger operation. What you don't know is that it's not just about money laundering or illegal deals. This goes back years. What they're hiding is a network of corruption that reaches into every part of society, business, politics, the media. They've built an empire on secrecy and fear, and they'll stop at nothing to protect it." Jared's pulse quickened. This was exactly what Kevin had warned him about. This was more than just a conspiracy, it was a powerful, underground empire that had the power to crush anyone who dared oppose it. "And what do you want from me?" Jared asked, his voice tight. John's eyes darkened. "We need you to help us take them down. You've got access to the hotel's inner circle, and you've got the evidence they've left behind. But it's going to take more than just exposing a few dirty secrets. You're going to have to be smart. You're going to have to be ruthless." Jared's mind raced. He had never asked for any of this. He had never wanted to get involved in something so dangerous. But now, there was no turning back. He was already in too deep. "I'll help," Jared said, though the words tasted bitter on his tongue. "But how do we expose them?" John's smile was cold and calculating. "We'll use their own weapon against them." As they spent the next few hours going over the information, Jared felt the weight of what he was about to do. He was no longer just trying to clear his name or get revenge for an innocent child. Now, he was part of something far bigger, a conspiracy that spanned across multiple industries, a web of corruption so vast it seemed untouchable. But Jared was determined. He couldn't walk away now. Too much was at stake. As he left the warehouse later that night, his thoughts raced. Kevin was right, this wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about fighting back. Exposing the truth. And if he did it right, maybe, just maybe, he could destroy the empire of corruption that had nearly cost him everything. Jared woke up the next morning with a sense of urgency pulsing through his veins. The stakes had never been higher, and the weight of the mission felt heavier with every passing second. He had no idea how long he could keep this up, how long he could keep running without being caught, without being silenced. But the truth was undeniable now, there was no turning back. Kevin had been right. The conspiracy went far deeper than Jared could have imagined. They were not just criminals, they were an intricate network of corruption, pulling strings from the shadows of business, law, and politics. If Jared wanted to survive, if he wanted to bring this entire thing down, he would need to outsmart them. And outsmarting them meant playing a dangerous game with people who were willing to do anything to protect their empire. It had been 2 days since Jared and Kevin had met with John. They'd spent that time preparing, gathering evidence, and making plans. The operation they were about to undertake wasn't something they could just walk into, it was going to require precision, secrecy, and nerves of steel. Jared sat in his small apartment, his hands shaking slightly as he stared at the stack of files on his table. These files contained everything they needed: financial records, personal connections, communication logs, and most importantly, the one piece of evidence that would expose the heart of the operation. It was risky, dangerous, even, but Jared knew that without it, everything they had worked for would be in vain. His phone buzzed, breaking his concentration. It was Kevin. "Meet me at the usual spot. It's time." Jared's stomach clenched. He grabbed his jacket, forcing himself to take slow, steady breaths. The moment of truth had arrived. There was no more room for mistakes. The usual spot was a small cafe on the corner of a quiet street, nondescript, unassuming, the kind of place where people could talk without being overheard. Jared arrived and spotted Kevin almost immediately, sitting in the far corner, his face hidden behind a newspaper. He waved Jared over. "I think we've got everything we need," Kevin said, folding the paper and tossing it aside as Jared slid into the booth. His voice was low, his eyes darting around the room. Jared nodded, glancing around nervously. "This is it, then. We go in, we expose them, and we walk away." Kevin's gaze hardened. "That's the plan. But you need to remember, we can't afford to make any mistakes. One wrong move, and we're both dead." Jared felt the weight of those words settle into his chest. He had known the risk from the start, but hearing it laid out so plainly made the reality of the situation even more suffocating. "We'll need a distraction," Kevin continued. "We're not just walking into the lion's den. We're going in to burn the whole thing down. Do we have everything we need?" Jared asked, his voice tight with nerves. Kevin pulled a thick envelope from his bag, placing it on the table. "This is the smoking gun. If we leak this, everything goes up in flames. But if we're caught before that happens..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Jared understood the gravity of the situation. If they didn't succeed, they wouldn't just be risking their lives, they'd be risking the lives of the people they were trying to protect. That night, as the city buzzed with its usual energy, Jared and Kevin made their way to the hotel. It was a massive, imposing structure, more like a fortress than a place of business. The hotel was the heart of it all, the central node in the network of power they were trying to expose. They didn't have much time. The operation had to happen quickly, or everything would fall apart. As they approached the back entrance, Kevin motioned for Jared to stay close. "We're going to need to get past security," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Once we're inside, we go straight to the records room. That's where the final piece of the puzzle is. But it's heavily guarded. Stay sharp." Jared nodded, his hands clammy. He had been in tight spots before, but nothing like this. This was an entirely different level of danger. They entered the building through the service entrance, moving swiftly through the narrow hallways that were barely lit. Jared's heart raced with every step, but he kept his focus. They had practiced this, the plan was airtight. But that didn't mean it would be easy. When they reached the security room, Jared took a deep breath. This was the moment. Kevin had the keycard that would grant them access to the records room, but they had to get past the security cameras. Kevin gestured toward the small control panel by the door. "We need to shut down the cameras for just a few minutes. That's all we need to slip by." Jared nodded, watching as Kevin worked the panel, his fingers moving with practiced ease. The red light above the door flickered and then went dark. "Let's move," Kevin whispered, leading the way. They crept through the hallway, moving as quietly as possible. Each step felt like an eternity, but finally, they reached the records room. Kevin used the keycard, and the door clicked open with a soft hiss. Inside, rows of filing cabinets stretched to the ceiling, each one packed with documents that held the secrets of the hotel's operations. But there was no time to sift through everything. They needed the key files, the ones that would prove the hotel's connection to the larger criminal enterprise. Kevin immediately went to a filing cabinet near the back of the room. He pulled open the drawers, rifling through them quickly but methodically. Jared kept watch by the door, his senses heightened. He could hear the faint sound of footsteps down the hallway. They had to hurry. Finally, Kevin found what they were looking for, a thick folder, marked with a red stamp, "Confidential." His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. That night, as the city buzzed with its usual energy, Jared and Kevin made their way to the hotel. It was a massive, imposing structure, more like a fortress than a place of business. The hotel was the heart of it all, the central node in the network of power they were trying to expose. They didn't have much time. The operation had to happen quickly, or everything would fall apart. As they approached the back entrance, Kevin motioned for Jared to stay close. "We're going to need to get past security," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Once we're inside, we go straight to the records room. That's where the final piece of the puzzle is. But it's heavily guarded. Stay sharp." Jared nodded, his hands clammy. He had been in tight spots before, but nothing like this. This was an entirely different level of danger. They entered the building through the service entrance, moving swiftly through the narrow hallways that were barely lit. Jared's heart raced with every step, but he kept his focus. They had practiced this, the plan was airtight. But that didn't mean it would be easy. When they reached the security room, Jared took a deep breath. This was the moment. Kevin had the keycard that would grant them access to the records room, but they had to get past the security cameras. Kevin gestured toward the small control panel by the door. "We need to shut down the cameras for just a few minutes. That's all we need to slip by." Jared nodded, watching as Kevin worked the panel, his fingers moving with practiced ease. The red light above the door flickered and then went dark. "Let's move," Kevin whispered, leading the way. They crept through the hallway, moving as quietly as possible. Each step felt like an eternity, but finally, they reached the records room. Kevin used the keycard, and the door clicked open with a soft hiss. Inside, rows of filing cabinets stretched to the ceiling, each one packed with documents that held the secrets of the hotel's operations. But there was no time to sift through everything. They needed the key files, the ones that would prove the hotel's connection to the larger criminal enterprise. Kevin immediately went to a filing cabinet near the back of the room. He pulled open the drawers, rifling through them quickly but methodically. Jared kept watch by the door, his senses heightened. He could hear the faint sound of footsteps down the hallway. They had to hurry. Finally, Kevin found what they were looking for, a thick folder, marked with a red stamp, "Confidential." His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Jared stepped closer, peering over his shoulder. The documents inside were even more incriminating than they had imagined. There were financial records detailing illegal transactions, names of high-profile politicians, and codes that led to accounts that could trace the money laundering all the way to the top. "This is it," Kevin whispered, his eyes wide. "This is the proof we need." Suddenly, there was a loud noise outside the door. "Shit," Kevin cursed, slamming the folder shut. "We've got company." The sound of footsteps grew louder, and Jared's heart skipped a beat. Someone was coming, someone who would stop at nothing to protect what they had built. Kevin grabbed the folder and motioned for Jared to follow him. There was no time to waste. They had to move, and they had to move fast. As they turned to leave, a sharp voice rang out from the hallway. "Stop right there." Jared's blood ran cold. The game had just changed. The voice from the hallway echoed through the dimly lit records room, sending a jolt of panic through Jared's chest. His pulse hammered in his ears, drowning out the other sounds of the hotel. The footsteps, heavier now, grew closer with every passing second. Kevin's face was a mask of determination, but Jared saw the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. They had reached the final stretch, but it felt like they were racing against an unstoppable force. "Get down," Kevin hissed, ducking behind a row of filing cabinets. Jared followed instinctively, the cold metal of the cabinet pressing against his back. His heart was pounding in his throat, and for a moment, all he could do was focus on breathing, slow, shallow breaths to keep the fear from overwhelming him. The footsteps halted just outside the door. Jared could feel the tension in the air, thick with the weight of what was about to happen. If they were caught now, it would be the end of everything. The hotel's security would be on them, the conspiracy would remain intact, and the evidence would disappear. But if they made it out, if they exposed what they had, the entire system would come crashing down. Jared's mind raced through options, but there were no good ones. They couldn't fight their way out, not with the security forces closing in. But there was one thing they could do. He turned to Kevin, his whisper barely audible. "Do you have the flash drive?" he asked, his voice tight. Kevin's eyes flashed with realization. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small USB drive, its surface gleaming faintly in the low light. It wasn't much, but it held everything: the digital copy of the documents, the codes, the financial transactions, the entire proof of the criminal network. If they could get it out, they had a chance to take down the operation. "Let's go," Kevin whispered. With careful, measured steps, they moved toward the back door of the records room. Kevin motioned for Jared to stay low as they crept along the perimeter of the hallway. The air felt thick with danger, each creak of their footsteps like a countdown to disaster. They made it to the service stairs. They had planned for this, the escape route was mapped out, and the exit wasn't far. They needed to reach the parking garage, where a car would be waiting to take them to safety. But just as Jared was about to turn the corner, a sharp shout rang out behind them. "Hey! Stop right there!" It was too late to run. Jared's heart skipped a beat as the sound of approaching footsteps surged behind them. There was no time to hide. No time to think. The only option was to fight back. Without a word, Kevin grabbed Jared by the arm, pulling him toward the door leading to the back alley. They burst through it, the cold night air hitting them like a slap to the face. But there was no relief, only the sound of running footsteps closing in. "We need a distraction," Kevin panted, his grip tightening on Jared's arm. Jared barely had time to process the words when Kevin yanked him toward a nearby dumpster. They crouched behind it, breathing hard. Jared's mind was spinning. He had the evidence. They had it. But they were so close to being caught. It was a race against time. If they didn't make it to the car soon, they would be trapped, exposed, and all of their efforts would have been in vain. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as they crouched behind the dumpster, the sounds of their pursuers growing fainter. Kevin peered around the corner, checking the street. The coast was momentarily clear. "This way," he muttered. They moved quickly, their steps measured and quiet as they rounded the corner and approached the street where their car was parked. The night was eerily quiet, save for the faint hum of the city's distant noise. Jared's eyes scanned the surroundings, his nerves on edge. Every shadow, every flicker of movement, set him on high alert. The car was just a few feet away, parked in a dark corner of the street. But as they neared the vehicle, Jared's blood ran cold. Two men stood by the car, their arms folded, looking as though they were waiting for them. "Shit," Kevin cursed under his breath. "We're too late." There was no escape. They had been outsmarted. They had been so close to freedom, so close to exposing the truth, but now they were cornered. Jared's mind raced. He had the evidence. If they could just get it into the right hands, everything would be over for the conspiracy. But if they were caught now, everything would be destroyed. One of the men approached, a calm, cold smile playing at the corners of his lips. "You've made a big mistake," he said, his voice low, almost disappointed. "You should have stayed out of this." Jared's mind spun. There was no bargaining. No escape. But he couldn't let it end like this, not when they had come so far. Kevin's eyes flicked to the men, then back to Jared. He didn't speak, but his expression said everything. They had to act fast. They had to make a final push, one last attempt to expose the truth before it was too late. Without warning, Kevin moved. He shoved the USB drive into Jared's hand and took off running down the alley. The men shouted, but it was too late, they weren't prepared for this. Jared's heart raced as he held the drive tightly in his hand. He had no choice. He couldn't let them stop him. Jared ran in the opposite direction, his legs burning with the effort. He didn't look back. The only thing that mattered was getting to the drop-off point. They had one chance to get the evidence out. His mind was focused, his every muscle straining as he pushed through the pain. Finally, he saw the street ahead, the familiar faces waiting for him, an ally, someone who had promised to help them in the final stretch. He reached them just as the first of the men rounded the corner. Jared shoved the USB drive into his hands, gasping for breath. "Make sure it gets to the press," Jared said, his voice trembling with urgency. "It's the only way." The man nodded, his eyes glancing nervously at the approaching figures. "You did the right thing," the ally said, giving Jared a reassuring look. "Now go. We've got it from here." Jared didn't waste another second. He turned and ran, the sound of the men's footsteps growing fainter with every step. As he disappeared into the night, the weight of the moment hit him. The battle wasn't over, not yet. The conspiracy would fight back, but now, they had the truth on their side. Jared's body ached from the effort, but the adrenaline kept him moving. He didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know if they would ever truly be safe. But one thing was certain, there was no going back now. The evidence was out. The world would know the truth. And as the sun began to rise on the horizon, Jared knew that, in the end, it had all been worth it.